What's up, guys? Zoe Rose here and Burrito. I wanted to jump on and do a little haircut theory. One of the last videos I had done, we touched a little bit on color theory, and I wanted to kind of jump into the basics of a little bit of haircutting theory as well, because I feel like that's something that a lot of people, again, if you're new, maybe you're still learning or working on, and if you've been doing hair quite a long time, maybe the basics have kind of slipped and the fundamentals aren't as fresh in your brain. So I figured, why not go over a little haircut theory today? So here we go. So a few basic things that you need to know when it comes to haircutting are going to be tension, elevation, and over direction. So in all of our haircuts, we have all of those three things. So depending on what you're doing is gonna affect how much of each of these things you use. So we might refer to these as like actions. So tension, over direction, elevation, and then cutting angle is another one. So when I refer to these things, doesn't matter what your background is. You might have different terms for them, but they're all present when it comes to hair cutting. So we're gonna start with tension. So tension is the degree of stress placed on the hair. So this could be with your fingers, how tightly you're holding that section of hair in your fingers. It could also be in your comb. We have our wide side of the comb, and then we have our fine side of the comb. So the difference between these two are gonna be our tension. So if you're holding the hair in your comb and you want less tension, you want to use the wide side of your comb. There's more space between the teeth here, so they're going to have a little bit less grab. The finer side, of course, they're closer together, so it's going to have a little bit more tension. So the reason that tension is important is because when we are doing a haircut, we want to have really, really good tension, because this is going to make the difference between a consistent haircut all around and an inconsistent haircut. So when you pull a guide or when you pull a cross check, your section should be pretty straight that you're looking at. If it's inconsistent, that could be a combination of inconsistency in all of our actions, but tension's a really, really big one. A lot of times I also find that people who have trouble finding their guide, they're always losing it when they're working their way around the head. That has a lot to do with tension. So I don't know if you guys can see how well I'm holding this hair, right? So I know it's a little bit far away, but I'm holding the hair pretty tight in my fingers. This is going to be super important when it comes to cutting. So another thing that you want to look for, let's say you take your subsection, right? See how that's nice and taut right in there? You don't want to see it buckling like this, okay? Now, this hair is dry, but it doesn't matter if the hair is wet, dry, whatever it may be, tension is still very important. When the hair is wet, you have to keep in mind that you're stretching the hair, right? So it's gonna shrink back up because you're technically stretching it and pulling it. So you guys can see here, there's a lot of tension. I'm holding this hair very tight. If you were to recomb and you see that hair buckle, even if it's just a little bit, you can tell that there's the lack of tension over here now, right? So this is why tension is super, super important. When you're taking subsections, you wanna make sure you have consistent tension throughout your section, okay? So given that example with my fingers, you can see the difference between holding the hair very taut and then having it a little bit looser with less tension. Another thing I want to show you guys, obviously we're not going to be cutting in our comb elevated like this, but you can see the difference between the wide side and the fine side. So when I take a subsection and I'm holding it taut, you can see that tension in through here, right? It's nice and even, it's consistent. I'm holding the hair very tight in my fingers, so that reflects in through the base of the hair here. Now, I'm gonna show you guys with the comb just so you can see the difference. I know we wouldn't typically be cutting with our comb elevated like this, but I want you guys to see the difference between the fine side and the wide side so you understand the difference when you're actually utilizing it, maybe for a one-length haircut or something like that. So I'm gonna take that same subsection, but this time I'm just gonna hold it up. So this is with my fine side. So you can see that it's buckling. You can see that little bit of looseness in through there. Now I want you guys to watch the difference when I take this same section with the wide side of the comb. Look how much more of a bend is in the hair, how much looser it is. And I'm not moving that, right? So you can see hair's dropping out. It's a lot flimsier than the fine side. So there's our fine side again, little bit of a buckle. You can tell that it's kind of bending a little bit because it doesn't have a ton of tension, but now watch this. So even more so, just holding it in the wide side of the comb, you can tell there's a lot less tension in there. So I want you guys to think about that when you're using your comb to cut hair, maybe at the base or at a one length, something like that. So now our second action is going to be elevation. So elevation is lifting the hair up and down on the head, kind of like an elevator. That's how you remember that one. Lifting the hair up and down on the vertical dimension. So let's say you're taking a vertical subsection. It's how much you're lifting the hair up and down, okay? So your elevation is gonna really help determine as far as technique goes, because we're talking vertically, right? So our technique is something, whether we're doing one length, layering, or graduation, whatever your background is, technique exists on the vertical dimension, right? So when we're taking vertical subsections, how we're determining that technique is gonna be with our elevation. Okay, so all you guys know DJ Muldoon, his pull away from what you want to keep. So this can go for over direction as well as elevation. So we're talking elevation. If we want to keep length towards the bottom, right? So we want to keep length at the very, very ends. We want to pull away from that. So we pull up, right? So that elevation is going to determine that our length is going to be shorter internally and longer externally. If you keep your elevation very, very low, then you're going to be doing a different type of technique. So elevation is super important because that pull up and down is going to determine where that hair's falling and how heavy or how soft it's falling. So then our third action that we are going to be discussing is over direction. So over direction is going to be kind of the opposite of elevation. We are pushing and pulling back and forth. So back and forth meaning on the horizontal dimension. So elevation, remember that elevator is being pulled up and down. Over direction is being pulled back and forth. So this is going to help determine our shape when we're talking about shape versus technique. So technique is going to be on that vertical dimension, right? So we have a vertical subsection. That's where we're going to see that technique. Our over direction is going to exist horizontally. So this is going to help determine our shape, right? So if we have something that's getting shorter towards the front and longer towards the back, that's probably going to be due to our over direction. So if I want everything to come to the center point here, and I want all my layers to get slightly longer as they get down here, I'm going to direct everything to the center using a stationary guide. That way it's going to for sure get longer because this hair is traveling further than this hair was. So that's up to our over direction. So we have our subsection, right? Our horizontal subsection. And if we're pushing everything to that center, we're guaranteeing that all these hairs are going to be getting slightly longer and longer. So you can really watch that over direction by looking at the base of the hair. So as you're pulling that hair, I mean, on this side, it's pretty obvious because we have a center point to pull to here. But as you're working, if you find yourself pushing too far across the head, it's going to start getting a lot longer, a lot more quickly. And then on the other side, for example, if we're pulling this hair to ourselves, it's a lot easier to direct too far over because it's human nature. It's a lot easier to pull this way. So our over direction is going to be really important in watching that, you know, whatever it may be that you're doing, but you just need to make sure that your over direction is consistent as well. Our fourth action is going to be our finger angle or a comb angle. So depending on what you're doing, if you're using your comb to cut or if you're using your fingers to cut is going to be kind of where this is dependent. So if we have, for example, if we're doing a layer and we want it to get a lot shorter internally and longer externally, that's going to be partially dependent on our finger angle, right? So all this hair is going to be quite a bit shorter than this hair out here. So if I want it to be a lot shorter internally, my finger angle is going to determine that. If I want it to be just slightly shorter internally, I might do something a little bit more subtle. So this is important to keep in mind because you might pull everything up to the same elevation, but alter your finger angle to get a different look. So if you're not consistent with your finger angle throughout the entire haircut, you might have a little bit of a different effect. So depending on what technique you're doing, you're going to need to be mindful of one or all four of those things. Even if your haircut, let's say for example, you're doing a line or a one length and it requires none of those things, right? So we want as little tension, as little over direction, and as little elevation as possible. Our finger angle or comb angle is going to determine the shape of that. So if we want a triangular line, we want it to get a little bit longer towards the front, we're gonna have to use our comb or our fingers to determine that. With that being said, just because we want no tension, no overdirection, no elevation, or as little as possible because we're human, it happens, but it's also very important to be consistent with that. So just because we want zero tension doesn't mean you forget about it. You have to make sure that your minimal tension is consistent throughout the whole haircut to get a consistent haircut. Just to kind of recap, tension is the degree of stress we place on the hair. So how tight we're holding the hair, whether it's in our comb or whether it's in our fingers. Then we have our elevation. So elevation is lifting the hair up and down on the head. Over direction is pushing or pulling the hair across, so more horizontally. Elevation, remember, like an elevator goes up and down, it exists on the vertical dimension. We've got our over direction. So over direction is on the horizontal dimension, so back and forth, okay? Elevation is up and down, over direction is back and forth. Then we have our finger angle. So our finger angle is going to determine the severity of the shape of our haircut, right? Subtle or dramatic. Just some very basic things to think about. So these all exist when it comes to haircutting, regardless of your background, but it's very important to be aware of all of them and make sure you're being consistent with each and every one of them. All over you. So we hope that was helpful. Just some haircutting basics, kind of get you through and refresh your memory a little bit. Yeah. If you guys want more information on any of these topics that we went over today, if you want me to go a little bit more in depth on any of them, let me know in the comments. And yeah, until next time, hope you guys are staying safe and hydrated. So if you're not kind of look for, which, let's see. I don't know if this is gonna be any better. So